Welcome summoners, and nice to see you for another ProGuides Wild Rift video. Today we have a very special treat for you, one of the upcoming champions, CAITLYN. You want to know how she works and what she does? No problem, we got you covered. So let's move over to the ability rundown immediately. First, we have a passive ability. CAITLYN headshots targets she has trapped or netted. Additionally, she gains a free headshot every 6 basic attacks, and attacks while she's in a brush count as 2. So what do headshots do? They deal bonus damage to non-champions, and they have double the range against trapped or netted targets. But they also deal bonus damage against champions, so don't forget that, it's just higher on minions. But now, let's briefly explore something that was very funny in the past of League of Legends PC. If you remember the item Runan's Hurricane, if CAITLYN walks into a brush, her auto attacks counted as 2 for the passive ability. So since Runan's added 2 bolts per attack, it was basically 3. And every one of these attacks, quote unquote, was counted towards this passive. So literally every single hit in a brush counted as a headshot, just because of that. And it would be funny to see if it ends up like that. Will they repeat the same mistake? We'll see, but it would be kind of unbalanced if they did. So let's hope they don't. So let's move over to the very first ability. This ability is called Piltover PEACEMAKER. CAITLYN revs up her rifle for 1 second to fire a narrow piercing shot dealing physical damage. After hitting any target, it opens up into a wider shot that deals 33% less damage. However, it always deals full damage to a trapped target. But now let's briefly speak about something very important here. CAITLYN is an auto-attack based champion, so she's not a spell weaver like Lucian. As the game goes on and we reach the later stages of the game, it might be suboptimal to actually use the spell, because we would lose effective DPS. Why, you might ask? Well, the reason is quite in the description of the spell. You are self-stunning yourself for 1 second while revving up the rifle, and that can get you killed and lose you a ton of damage, because in theory it's still a skill shot that can be dodged. But for now, let's move on to the next spell, the Yordle Snap Trap. CAITLYN sets traps that an enemy champion can spring, immobilizing them for 2 seconds if they do so, and they're revealed for a short duration. Also on top of that, several traps at once may be placed. And as a nice takeaway here, trapped enemies take increased damage from the headshot passive. So whenever you're feeling unsafe, place those traps around you or barricade off a corridor so the enemy can't just walk through it. And now let's go to our peel spell, the 90 caliber net. Upon casting it, we fire a net, knocking us backwards. The net deals magic damage and slows the enemy hit by a certain percentage for 1 second. This is our most important spell in a fight, because if we waste it, we are basically a sitting duck apart from our traps and summoner spells. But what we also have to keep in mind is that if we use this ability, we might knock ourselves out of auto attack range. And with that, we have yet again an active DPS loss. However, if we are out of range, and we did that by choice, we have another ability in our hands to do something about it. Our ultimate ability, Ace in the Hole. It takes a second to line up the perfect shot on an enemy from a long distance. The shot deals physical damage, but other champions can intercept it, so only cast this if you're very certain that you're going to hit the target you want to. And as we know from the PC version, this spell deals a lot of damage. But yet again, a tool we don't really utilize in a late game teamfight because we'd most likely get killed. And before we move over to the more conceptual parts of what CAITLYN brings to the table, it's time for a question of the day. What's your most feared character when you're playing AD carry? Let me know in the comments below. For this, let's start with the early game. In the early game, CAITLYN is a lane bully. She has a super high range and is supposed to hit the enemy every single time when they make a mistake in lane. A mistake could be, for example, last hitting a minion when she's in range and has nothing other to do than to hit the enemy. CAITLYN is also one of the champions that prefer the wave in the enemy tower. She wants to bully them under tower with the power of her traps that may dictate the movements the enemy has available. For example, you can block off the very narrow corridor next to the tower so the enemy has only one way of approaching the wave. And with all that in mind, you can also hide traps behind the tower. Think of their vision and use that vision against them. They don't see everything at all times, so think how they place their camera and lay down the traps in a way that they can't see them immediately unless they relocate the camera. With this, you can get an easy combo into their face and bully them out of lane. And then you're doing what CAITLYN loves doing, taking towers. This is something you want the most because you want the gold. Another thing you have to get used to when playing CAITLYN starts with the very leash itself if you choose to leash. Utilize brushes for your passive. With this, you get more damage done in a shorter time frame. Another thing you should also utilize in lane is an enemy self-stun. So what is an enemy self-stun? Whenever you attack something, whenever you cast something, certain champions are locked out from doing any movements at that moment in time. This moment can be abused to cast a skill shot. With this, you'll guarantee the hits and make sure they suffer for their mistakes. So with this we got the early laning phase covered. We want to win the lane and we want to stomp the lane because that is what we need to do. But what do we do after the laning phase? After the laning phase we want to rotate around the map and farm for turret platings. We want to amass as much gold as possible. Ideally, we want to be with the team for that instance. We want to siege and force the enemies to give up towers. Yet again, utilizing our superior auto-attack range and our traps. Because the enemy can't just walk through them, because then they're actually stunned, they take a lot of damage from our spells and our auto-attacks, and our allies can capitalize on that as well. And what exactly do we do in the late game? In theory, CAITLYN is a mobile turret that loves to siege the enemy base. Whenever she gets an opportunity to do so without being flanked by the enemy, she is just overbearing and broken, at least for the PC version of the game. On top of that, her traps make it really hard to do anything about that unless the surprise effect kicks in. But now let's move on to our purpose in teamfights. We are supposed to do the dirty work. We hit everybody who is closest to you, unless we determine that the enemy that is closest to you is not a threat at all. Let's just picture an Alistar for this instance. An Alistar who has used all his cooldowns and popped ultimate next to you is not really useful. He's not going to do much apart from soaking damage, and then soaking damage is his primary job, and we would be foolish to attack him in that case because we'd play into his cards. However, in certain instances we can just ignore him, walk past him and hit the other members of the enemy team. But it's always a very sketchy thing because you have to consider his cooldowns. If those cooldowns come up again, he can then just push you into the enemy team and you're in for a bit of trouble. But if you want the real too long didn't read for this, as an AD carry your job is to stay alive and deal damage. I know it sounds kinda easy, but it's not as easy as you might think it is. Because let's imagine you're facing a Zed. A Zed is an assassin and assassins are designed to kill carries. So what does this mean for you? You basically stay away from him unless you have proper counterplay available or he is stunned or anything else. Because if you give him the opportunity to kill you, you will most likely die. Even though you are theoretically able to place a trap behind you because Zed will always spawn behind you when he is going to use his ultimate on you. But strictly thematically speaking, it's not your job to kill the assassin. However, if you get the opportunity to do so for free, you should always do it. And with that, we get to the big 3 rules for the teamfight scenarios. Number 1. Can you kill the enemy before he kills you? Similar to the Zed example, you have to think about this before you actually act. Number 2. Can he escape from you? If you hit an enemy that is running away already and you could hit somebody who's still in the fight, then you should make the choice to hit the target still closest to you. By doing so, you might help your teammates, but it's still a very situational thing. It's just about like a little checklist here. And number 3, which target is a priority? With this, we go back to the Alistar example. If the Alistar pops all his cooldowns and is just next to you, soaking damage is his primary job, so don't play into his cards. With all that covered, we now move on to how to pilot an AD carry. And what does an AD carry need to carry? Well, it might be a very simplistic answer, but it's the most truest answer you will hear. In order to carry, you need a lot of gold, because you are the most item-dependent role in the game. Which doesn't mean you should always AFK farm. There's a specific timer in which you need to start getting active, which is usually around your power spike. For example, when does a Kai'Sa spike? A Kai'Sa becomes very strong the moment she gets the evolve on her first ability. With this, she basically wins any 1v1 in any scenario unless she's on like 1 HP. And similar thoughts can be used on any other champion. For example, a Lucian. A Lucian can feel very weak and then he suddenly has 3 items and you just die because, well, AD carry things. But the hardest thing to achieve as an AD carry is to hit those items before the game is over. You have the least agency in the game and you have to deal with the most of annoying things over the course of a game. However, once you reach your item spike, tables turn quite fast and you start one-shotting people. So the 2 rules of thumb here would be to minimize deaths and to maximize gold. By minimizing deaths, I mean, for example, don't participate in fights you cannot win. Like if your team wants to contest a dragon that is already lost, please don't go there. You'll just end up dying, giving the enemy team more gold and losing the wave and tower in the process, and then you'll be a very sad AD carry. Cause even the worst player against you will kill you if he has double the gold of yours. And now let's talk about a few mechanics of CAITLYN. For example, on the PC version you can cancel the E ability, or rather the Q ability, by casting E and Q at the same time. With this, you get an advantage in fights in terms of damage. Also on top of that, the Runans interaction. In the past, Runans granted you multiple passive procs instantaneously, which means more headshot and more damage until it was fixed. And your most bread and butter combo is landing an auto attack on a trapped target, then casting your third ability into your first ability into another auto attack and then into your ultimate ability if you're sure to finish off the target. You'd be surprised how much damage it does. And with that out of the way, we are now talking about the item builds. There are a few things we could discuss and a few things we could consider. The first item build is Infinity Edge, Runan's Hurricane, Bloodthirster, Mortal Reminder and Stormrazor. For the boots, we would most likely take Defensive or Gluttonous boots. If we are provided with Zerker Greaves though, well, any AD carry in the future will always go Zerker Greaves. You might also see a few items on this champion you're not used to see. This champion isn't a champion that weaves spells, so Charge Blade isn't really the best of items. The more spells we lose in the later stages of the game, the more DPS we'd lose, and therefore Charge Blade just doesn't make any sense. So even though Stormrazor is an overall bad item in terms of stats, it grants us something we want. Attack speed, AD, crit, and some ranged slow, which is quite nice to have as an AD carry. But now we go over to the funny idea. If you can cancel the animation of your trap, you might even build Charge Blade for more burst. This is something that is very hard to pull off if it actually works, but we don't know if it works, so it's just some funny idea. So in this build, you go Infinity Edge into Charge Blade, into Bloodthirster, Mortal Reminder, and if you don't build the one item, you just build the other item on the next slot into a Phantom Dancer or a Runan's Hurricane last. And for the boots, the same thing basically applies again. So we can all sit and wait patiently until we see what it actually does and how she works in Wild Rift. And that's it. Thank you for watching and see you tomorrow for another video of an incoming champion. If you subscribe of course, which is what you're going to do right now anyway. So see you tomorrow and thank you again. Peace.